Back around the time of World War I, between 1916 and 1918, when most of your grandmothers and grandfathers were still young girls and boys, an Englishman named Cecil Sharp and his companion Maud Carples traveled through this part of the country hunting for hidden treasures. Now, they weren't looking for gold or diamonds, though. They were looking for a treasure of songs that had been carried into the heart of the southern mountains by settlers who had come to America from England, Scotland, and Ireland in the 17th century. Cecil Sharp and Maud Carples had collected folk songs throughout the British Isles for many years, but nowhere did they find the wealth of music that existed in this area. In fact, they noted that the most fertile ground was on either side of the mountains separating Upper East Tennessee and western North Carolina. Most of the modern inventions that are now so much a part of our lives, like cars, radios, records, and TV, had not yet affected the old way of life in which people had to provide for practically all of their needs, and mountain people were very well able to entertain themselves. Singing was an especially important form of entertainment. Families and neighbors would get together after finishing the day's work and share beautiful old songs and ballads that had been passed down to them by word of mouth over the centuries. Sharp and Carples were especially interested in the old ballads, which told stories about kings and queens, lovers and murderers, castles and ghosts. They collected 72 of them, in fact. One of my favorites, which they included in their book, English Folk Songs from the Southern Appalachians, is called The House Carpenter. In the early days, instruments, aside from the fiddle, were scarce in the mountains, so I'm going to sing this in the old-time way without any accompaniment. Well met, said in old true love. Well met, said he. I've just returned from the salt, salt sea, and it's all for the love of thee. I could have married a king's daughter dear. I'm sure she'd married me, but I've forsaken her and all of her gold, and it's all for the love of thee. Well, if you could have married a king's daughter dear, I'm sure you're much to blame, for I have married a house carpenter, and I think he's a nice young man. Well, if you forsake your house carpenter and come along with me, I'll take you where the grass grows green on the banks of Binnery. Well, if I forsake my house carpenter and go along with you, what would I have to maintain me on? Oh, what then would I do? I have 3 ships upon the sea, 2 more upon the land, and 20 jolly sailor boys, and all at your command. Well, she picked up her pretty little babe, and kisses gave it 3. She said, I'm going to leave you now, keep your papa company. They had been sailing about 2 weeks, I'm sure it was not 3, when this poor lady began to weep, and she wept most bitterly. Well, that's are you weeping for your house house carpenter? And are you weeping for your store? Or it's are you weeping for that pretty little babe that you shall see no more? Well, I'm not weeping for my house carpenter, and I'm not weeping for my store, but yes, I weep and most prettily for that babe I'll see no more. They had been sailing about 3 weeks. I'm sure it was not 4, when there sprang a leak in the bottom of the ship, and it sank to rise no more. Now, one of the finest ballad singers living in the southern mountains today is a 79-year-old retired coal miner from Mingo County, West Virginia, named Nimrod Workman. Nimrod not only sings, but he acts out the stories of his ballads, as we're going to see in his version of another old mountain ballad that Sharp and Carples collected. And this is Lord Bateman.
This is one of the oldest songs in the world. There's not too many people that knows that. I think myself and my daughter is the only one I give it to. Now let's this song up to her. This is her song. I'm giving it to her. It's hers. This is one of the oldest songs in the world. This is an antique. There's nobody can do it like I do it. There's nobody can do it like the guy that learned me was dead and gone around about 60 years ago. I was a kid and he would keep me up on his knee, and he wouldn't let nobody have this song but me. I promised him I'd never give it to nobody, but I broke my promise. I'd give it to my daughter, and I started to sing it. Of course, it's not too long, I'll be leaving here. I've got both lungs broke down. I'm not too able to sing, but I enjoy music. I love it better than anything. And I'm going to sing this Lord Bateman for you. Now lived a man of honor. He was a noble man of high degree. He could nor would not be contented till he sailed a voyage all over sea. He sailed east and he sailed west. He sailed on there some Turkish shore. There he was caught and he was put in prison for 7 long years, to stay or more. They bored a hole through his left shoulder, tied him to a lustrous tree. They threw him in to them dungeon cells where daylight he might never see. And the Soul King, he had a daughter. She was a noble daughter do agree. She's stolen key to her father's prison. I'm that Lord babe, till she's set free. She took him to her father's orly, called for a glass of most strongest wine I've ever had. He don't come to him. She said, Lord, best honey, I wish you'd mine. Sulam Pine was her name. Sulam Pine. She had a ship, set it floating on the deep. She shipped Lord Bay on across that sea, and she wished him safe in his own country. She said, honey, I've got a bargain to make with you. You with no woman, nor me with no man. When 7 long years has passed and over, then I'll cross these raging main. Them 7 long years had passed and gone, and the 8th year were eternal on. She took her gold tape in her hand to seek her love in that foreign land. She traveled till she came to Lord Basement's dwelling. There she rapped most modestly, who is thou, who's thou? Cried a proud young porter, thou rapped so may these whole valleys ring. She said, is this your place, Lord Basement's dwelling, or is your noble Lord with him? Yes, oh yes, cried this proud young porter, but he just this day took a new bride in. She said, go and ask him for 3 cuts of bread, 1 bottle of love, most strongest wine. Ask him if do not remember who fitting frown them cold unbound. Hey, with his proud young porter round, and he fell upon his bended knee. I'll bet, Lord Baston said, that Sudan Pine has crossed that sea. Again, this crabber, she had a gay gold ring on every finger, and around her middle, gold diamonds 3, and she's got gold up around her neck to buy your bride and company. Lord Baseman read them from it able, and the table he split all 3, says understand the most fair little damn fool that my 2 eyes did ever see. He took Soodlum Pine by a little white hand and let over his marble walls. He was married to one, and the morning sun, sweet Soodlum Pine, at 12 o'clock at noon. That's hard.
There's a song
These old ballads were mostly adult entertainment, but there are also many songs which were used to entertain children. Most kids today like to be scared a little bit, and that's why horror movies and horror comics are so popular. And mountain children in the old days were no different. Now here's an old song with a surprise ending that I learned from the singing of Gene Ritchie of Viper, Kentucky, and it's called, "Where Are You Going, My Good Old Man?" Where are you going, my good old man? Where are you going, my honey, my lamb? Out. What you gonna do, my good old man? What you gonna do, my honey, my lamb? Oh, I figure I'll go down to the grocery store and hang around the stove and not do much of anything. When you coming back, my good old man? When you coming back, my honey, my lamb? Around dinner time. What you want for dinner, my good old man? What you want for dinner, my honey, my lamb? Eggs. How many do you want, my good old man? How many do you want, my honey, my lamb? Oh, I figure about 2 or 3 dozen. But that's gonna kill you, my good old man. But that's gonna kill you, my honey, my lamb. Don't care if it do. What you gonna do then, my good old man? What you gonna do then, my honey, my lamb? Well, you can go ahead and bury me in the chimney. Oh, what you gonna do if the cinders fall on you? What you gonna do if the cinders fall on you? I guess I'll come back and I'll haunt you. A haunt can't haunt a haunt, my good old man. A haunt can't haunt a haunt, my honey, my lamb. Now haunts were real popular in children's songs, and they are also popular in stories too. And next thing we're going to see is a story being told by Mr. Marshall Ward of Banner Elk, North Carolina, and it's called I Know, You Know, and Tatey Poe.
I'm going to tell you a myth, I think you'd call it. It's I Know, You Know, and Tatey Poe. It's about a little old man. He lived way, way back in the woods. It was so far back in the woods, no one else hardly ever went back there where he lived. And this little man, where he lived out there in the woods, he had a little house that he built himself, and in proportion to his size, he was about 3 feet tall. And this little old man, all the friends he had out there to live with him were 3 dogs. And these dogs named, I know, you know, and Telepo. And he loved his dogs because his dogs caught all the food that he ate. He'd go out and catch all kinds of animals, and they would kill them. And the little old man would skin them and pack them away the meat. And he always gave the dogs their potion. They ate a lot more than he did. And he was good to his dogs. And in his house, he had a little house, just a 1-room house, made out of logs. He'd made it himself. And it was in proportion to his size. He made a little chimney to it. And on that fireplace, he did all of his cooking. He had one little pot. He cooked all his meat in that pot on that fireplace. And the dogs, of course, eat theirs raw. Well, he always cut a lot of firewood and had it ready. He'd done that when the weather was pretty. He didn't farm any. He just lived off the berries and the animals and things in the forest. And you know, he could dry his meat and keep it right on and on. And he did that. He knew how. So he had one little chair made out of poles just to fit him. And his bed was made out of leaves and skins laid over it. And his bed was made out of little poles and tied together with hide. You might say that it's cut in strips. And his dog had a bed in the corner of the room, made out of leaves, a bed. He put fresh leaves in there. He'd change them off so often. And the dogs, they knew where their place was, the same as he knew where his bed was. And this little man, he was so old, nobody knew how old he was. He'd been out there, and the man back in town, first time they seen the little old man, the man was the oldest ones they had in town, about 102 years old. And he was an old man then, the first time they seen him. And he had a great, big, long, white beard. His hair was just as white as snow, and his beard was just as white as snow. And his beard was so long, he had to tie it around his waist 3 times to keep from stepping on it. And his hair was so long, he had to tie his hair around his waist to keep from stepping on it. And this little old man, every year, he went to town once a year. And he always caught enough of hides and furs when it was cold out there. The colder the weather is, the better the pelt of the hide is. That means the fur won't shed, won't come out, the hide. It'll hold it when it's cold. And that's when you kill the animals that get the pelt. And so that's when he killed his animals. Dogs would kill them, he'd skin them and fix them up. And just at the end of the trapping year, about the last of March, he'd pack all the furs that he'd caught on a little sled he'd made, and he'd made a set of harness for his dogs. I know you and Telepo had a set of harness. And he'd pack them on this sled, and they would travel about 10 to 12 miles, maybe 15 a good day, traveling. And it would take him a month to get to town. That's how far he lived away from town, in the woods. And you know, every day he didn't take any food with him to eat. He always just turned I know you don't Telepo loose and catch him a rabbit, a deer, and just eat what he wanted of it, and hang the rest up in a bush. And if it was there when he come back, he'd get it, and if it wasn't, he'd go on. Maybe some other animals he'd eat up. He'd give you know what I know and Telepo all they wanted to eat. And that's the way he got his food. And when he got to town, everybody had heard tell the little old man. He'd run through the little town and say, the little old man's here. And they was happy to see him. They loved him. He could sing. He could dance. He could turn flips. And you know, they'd give him money to let his beard down. And his beard was over 10 feet long and let it down. It'd drag way out there, and they just tickled to death to see that long beard and long hair. And you know, this little old man, he loved to stay in town, but he only stayed about a week. He sold his furs. And he always bought him about 3 books every year he went to town. Now in his little house, he had a bookshelf made plumb around. And he had it almost full. And he only bought 3 books a year. He'd bound to been old, if you just figure out them books he had. And no one knew how he learned to read. As far as they knew, he never went to school. And he was one of the best readers you ever saw. He could really fly in a book. And he enjoyed reading books. He read them books over and over he had out there. Well, after this little old man had went to town, stayed there for about 2 weeks and sold his furs, he bought him 3 books and some other little stuff he wanted like salt, sold him maybe a little sugar or something, and he packed it on his sled and hitched up I know you know and tailor poles ready to go back to the woods where he lived. Well, everybody was sad in town. They hate to see the little old man leave. He was the life of the town when he was there. Well, this little old man traveled for about a month and got back. He'd leave March, April, and back to May. But when he got back that night, he got back home. You know, that day it had been a drizzly, damp day, raining, and not too hard, but just a steady drizzle all day. The little old man was just as wet as he could be. His dog was wet. And that day they hadn't caught a single thing to eat, not one bite. He was hungry and tired and wet. And the first thing he did, he built him a fire in his little chimney and dried his clothes, got warm. I know and you know and Teddy Pole laid down in the corner and went to sleep, and they were snoring away. And you know, the little old man picked up his book after he got his clothes dry and started reading one. He just got lost from the world. When he read a book, he just acted that book out. He was doing everything that book said. He was out of time. And about 10 o'clock it was. Someone pick on the little old man's door. And all these years he lived out there had never been a peck on his door before. And he couldn't believe his ears. Why in the world could be a pecking on his door out there? And oh, I know and you know and Teddy Pole raised up and the bristle stuck away up on the shoulder. And one went, rrr, rrr, and the one, rrr. And you know, that little man runs to the door, opened the door. And you know what I know, and Teddy Pole took out after that creature or what it was, and right down that hill they went just like a streak of lightning. And right on down a big hill they went, and up across another big hill, and way over across another big hill, and plumb out of hearing. And that little man, he stood there, he pulled that long beard, he jerked that hair, he kicked a chunk of stuff and hurt his toe. Why in the world could outrun his dog? Never had been anything in that forest could outrun his dog. And he couldn't believe that. That thing had went like a streak of lightning. And they'd gone plumb out of hearing. He stood there and listened and listened. He began to call. He called and called and called. In about 30 minutes, I know, you know, and Teddy Pole came back. And they were panting. Oh, their tongue was way out. And the dog pressed spars at their tongue. And that saliva was just running off their tongue with the perspiration, and they was going ha 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 ha, and they went on in the house, and the old man, he couldn't believe his eyes, what he'd heard and what he'd heard. He couldn't believe a thing. How could that thing outrun his dogs like that? Never had anything in all his life could run that fast. Well, this little old man.
Well, now we've got some idea of some of the ways in which mountain people used to entertain each other before there were TVs, radios, and stereos. Next time, we're going to be taking a look at mountain instruments and mountain music. See you then.